Welcome to this Considered Opinions podcast.
I'm Dougal.
And I'm Celia. Thank you for joining us.
Today we are going to talk about beauty and why it is important to us all. So, why does beauty matter?
Beauty matters because it's food for the soul. It uplifts us, it inspires us, it makes our lives better. And we live in a world that doesn't value beauty as much as it should. And there's a cult of ugliness and a cult of utility in our modern world that has quite far-reaching negative impacts.
What would you say is an example of the cult of ugliness?
Brutalism is probably a good example as far as architecture goes.
Is that like the hideous government buildings that we see everywhere that were built in the 1960s? That concrete...
Pretty much.
That's brutalism.
I once had a tutor, and he'd come back after half-term break and he said, during the break I went to some different universities around New Zealand and they all seem to have this same thing in common. They all seem to be inspired by communist architecture.
They do. They do. All of them are like it.
And the room that we were in was looking out on a concrete wall.
Yes.
So that's an example of ugliness that we get used to in our everyday life and being surrounded by. And part of that is that there is I would almost say it's a cult, a deification of utility. Something has to be useful.
Right.
And so no thought is given to form. It's function over form.
Right, putting function before everything else.
Yes, and what you'll find with that is that if you focus solely on something's utility, it has a finite life and it will become irrelevant and unused. Whereas if you have something that, and this is not saying that beauty has no thought to function.
Yes, yes. But
if you have something that is also created beautiful as well as the functional, it will stay functional, and so you will have it will be repurposed quite often.
Is that because people want to repurpose it because there's something other than what you're doing with it that gives it a purpose, that the beauty in and of itself gives something a purpose, even if it's not related to its supposed original use?
Yes.
Because I suppose you'd say that a painting actually has no practical use other than looking at it and it being nice to look at.
Or you could say it's covering up a rip in the wallpaper.
Serving a purpose, but it's beautiful at the same time. Yeah, true. But if it's beautiful, you'll take it to the next house, even
exactly.
if there's no rip in the wall.
Exactly.
Well, if we're talking about art in relation to beauty, isn't art supposed to be edgy and pushing the envelope?
I would say an emphatic no. Because if art has got to be edgy and always on the outskirts and pushing the envelope, then we are going after a shock value. And we're also prioritising the quote-unquote original over the purpose of true, long-lasting, impactful art.
So what you're saying is the purpose of art is not to be edgy, not to shock, not to push the envelope. So what is the purpose of art and beauty? And what's the difference between the two? Because there is a bit of a difference there.
There is a difference, absolutely. And with art, and this can be the visual arts, it can be music, it could be literature, but with art, it's about helping people to process their experience. It's helping us to learn to be better humans. It's about the processing of the human experience. And great art has that timeless quality because throughout the ages, we are still humans and we still have similar experiences. And with art, it can help us to deal with and process that. And also, another big part of processing particularly hard experiences is not being alone. There was
Right.
a time when I was feeling very sad, and I felt like quite alone in that sadness. And I saw a painting that I had seen multiple times before. It was a Picasso, The Weeping Woman. And when I looked at that painting in that moment, it was a great relief because suddenly I was not alone.
Yes.
Somebody else understood, had felt, and that made the experience a lot more manageable.
I guess this brings to mind for me some of the things that Jordan Peterson has said, because he talks about stories as being helping us process our experiences. That basically the story that happens to us, or as life happens to us, that's the raw information coming in. We process that and spit it out as a story, and then we reprocess it, and it's an iterative process, and it ends up refining the story down to the lessons that we learn from life. So would you say art has that function as well, that it's sort of helping us? It sounds like it's helping us process, what's happening to us in our life.
Well, there's two things that's going on there. One is the story you tell yourself.
Yes.
So how we experience things depends on the self-talk that's going on. And we can tell, the way we tell the story to ourselves in our memory over and over actually shapes the memory. And it can, over time, they can actually take quite a different form from the original experience. And that's the power of the story that we tell ourselves. But there's also the story that we might read, and that would be a story that is about the humanness of life and experiences that other humans have, and they help us to learn. And a big part of that is knowing that this is often a communal experience. Other people have been through this. They've not only been through it, but they've survived it. So when we feel something's a bit overwhelming, to know that that's an okay part of life, and an expected part of life,
Yes.
that makes a huge difference to our mental health and our emotions.
Our resilience.
Exactly.
It's giving us tools to be able to handle what may be new experiences, but they're not new experiences because we've heard about these sorts of things before.
And it stops these new experiences from being overwhelmingly catastrophic to us emotionally sometimes.
Yes. So the second half to that question is, what's the difference between art and beauty? Is beauty a necessary component of art? Is art something that mimics beauty, or it is the very embodiment of beauty? How do they relate to each other?
Beauty is a necessary component of art. That's something that is probably going to be a controversial idea in our postmodernist world, because
in our culture today
we
wouldn't have been in the past, but it is today.
Exactly. We don't think that beauty is a necessary component in art because, there's hard things in life, and how do you depict those terrible things? Life is not always beautiful. And it actually depends on how you approach it. So take, for example, in the past, you take Michelangelo's statue, the Pieta. So
yes,
Mary is holding the crucified Jesus, and that is the most awful moment, a terribly sad, graphically violent thing that has happened to her son, and then the mother is holding, having observed this torturous death, brutal death happen, and yet it is beautiful. That statue is still beautiful.
So there's almost a redemptive quality to art, that you can take bad experiences and redeem them by turning them into something beautiful.
You could look at it like that.
So how did we get to this point? If art and beauty were important in the past, how have we ended up in this cult of ugliness? Is this another one of the ramifications of materialism and the sort of the philosophies of the last couple of 100 years?
Well, I think specifically we've come through an aesthetic iconoclasm during the 20th century. A lot of it is post Second World War.
Yes.
And there's been an idealization of the ugly. And you actually will have people describe TV series as gritty. And that's a good thing, apparently.
Right.
And that's part of the idealization of the ugly, that life is, the default position is that life is dark and ugly and harsh.
Right.
And so that's what we should see and depict. Whereas as human beings, we need beauty. It feeds our souls. It inspires us to keep going sometimes, to make our lives better, to make the world around us better. There's a lovely story. It's actually a children's picture book called Miss Rumphius. But in the story, this little girl listens to her grandfather's tales of things that he did in his life when he was younger, and traveling the world and seeing all these exotic places and things like that. And she says, oh, when I grow up, I'm going to do that too. And he says to her, well, there is one thing you must still do. You must do something to make the world more beautiful.
Okay.
And that's, in a nutshell, a depiction of how we can approach our lives. There's another story of, this is a fairy tale, of a princess, and everywhere she walks, flowers bloom.
Okay.
And I find that a lovely picture of making sure that as we're going through life, we're making it a more beautiful place.
So how do we go about bringing beauty into our day-to-day lives? I mean, is beauty only sculpture and music and literature, or is beauty growing some flowers? Is beauty having a tea ritual?
I think that's a really good place to start. And it reminds me that on RNZ they have a daily beauty spot, something beautiful. And it's obviously an auditory beauty spot, being radio, but it is still taking a moment to enjoy. And it's also, I think this is part of a need to re-enchant the world.
Right.
We've lost a lot of enchantment in our day-to-day lives. And by enchantment, I don't mean magic. I mean a sense of wonderment and gratitude. And in our postmodernist society, we're so busy saying, oh, I know how it works.
Right.
That we forget to appreciate the moment.
So that would be like, it's a starlit night, you're outside and you're busy thinking about how many billion light years away that star is and how it's burning, instead of just going, wow, that's incredible. Look at all of those stars. Look at that Milky Way. Isn't that beautiful?
Yes. Another example is, I was in the art gallery last week and I was looking at a Monet, and you get right up close to the painting and you can spend time looking and seeing, look at the depth of the paint on the canvas and look at the brush strokes and look at the colours that he's used. But you actually have to take a couple of meters steps back and look at the painting and take a moment to appreciate it, rather than the nuts and bolts of how it works, and go, oh look, it's water lilies, or it's a Japanese bridge.
Yes.
So you need to,
you might quite literally not see the painting through the brushstrokes.
Basically, yes.
And some people are not going to be, their thing is not, painting, or it may not be astronomy, but I mean, there's beauty everywhere around us, isn't there?
I think also we've had this idea that has come more recently, that beauty is for the weak. If you can deal with the gritty and the harsh and the unpleasant, you're strong. And if you have to have the soppy beautiful stuff, and that's really not what beauty is about. There's beauty around us in all sorts of areas if we care to look. There's a lovely quote by P.B. Shelley, and he's actually talking about poetry, but I think it's even better understood if you think about it in relation to beauty. And he says that it enlarges the circumference of the imagination by replenishing it with thoughts of ever new delight. And that really, I think, expresses what beauty does for us and why it's important to mental health and to people's everyday lives.
That's quite countercultural at the moment, that idea. He's talking about imagination. Well, imagination is not physical, it's non-material. And a lot of people have an approach to beauty that it must be something material, that we see beauty through our eyes or our ears, or we smell it, or we taste it, or we touch it, that it comes through our senses. But that kind of restricts beauty, because what if it isn't coming through your senses? What if it's actually totally disembodied within your mind? Something like reading a novel, it doesn't, yes, it has a physical form in the book, yes, the words have physical form, but the ideas that the words express actually have no physical form at all. They are simply ideas within your head that you are engaging with your imagination.
And take, for example, a description of something beautiful. It's actually takes form in your imagination.
Is that part of the reason why beauty is in the eye of the beholder? Because it depends upon how you are interpreting something that you have in your life. A lot of it has to do with attitude.
A lot of it has to do with attitude, and that also comes back to the story that we tell ourselves that we discussed earlier. And it's about how we appreciate things, and that comes back to the re-wonderment, shall we say, of the world, the re-enchantment of the world, taking that time to have a sense of wonder, to have that sense of its gratitude is an important part of it as well. And I think the thing is that materialism is the objectification of the world.
Ooh, I like that. Materialism is the objectification of the world.
And that restricts beauty, because then it has to be something physical. And that itself creates issues, because then there's an objectification of beauty. You commodify it and you make it about something that you can make money from or pay for, rather than a emotional and mental experience.
Well, what about if you go in the other direction? What if you make beauty everything and make it the ends in itself? Is that potentially a problem?
Yes, I think so, because it's not the answer. Beauty in and of itself is not the answer. It is an important part of having emotional and mental health. And also, I think if people are happier individuals, that pays forward into their behaviours and then the society that we live in.
So we've got to have balance, is what I'm hearing. We can't deify beauty, but we can't make it simply an ordinary, unimportant thing.
And then materialise it.
Is there a thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think we should all try and find a way to cultivate beauty in our lives. Cicero put it this way. He said, if I have a library and a garden, I have everything I need. And I think that's a lovely way to approach it, because it keeps it simple. Thank you for joining us for this Considered Opinions podcast. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe.